And
Yes.
there's also, from what I understand, I mean, the talks are going to continue, and I assume that the cessation of hostilities in numerous theaters is going to expand as the talks expand as well. Just as when they look at the fine print of like the denuclearization side of things in the 60-day ceasefire period, if they sign the MOU without Israel trying to ruin it in some meaningful way. I suspect that there will be more talks. There will be further talks about like what Israeli restraint looks like later down the line. Do you agree with that?
I look, we have to look, I think, also at the Israeli elections. I mean, you look at what passes as the left, in establishment Israeli politics,
Yeah, they
and
left
you look
Israel.
at right. But I'm talking about, though, even at the level of like
Yeah.
political opposition parties running against Netanyahu, whether it's Lapid, or Gantz or others, the rhetoric about Netanyahu is that like he didn't go far enough, that it was a failure,
Oh yeah.
that he's lost against Hezbollah, that they're still killing our soldiers, that they lost against Hamas, they're still refusing to disarm, and they still control 30 or 40% of Gaza, that the Iranian state is still intact, to the point where right before you and I came on the air, Netanyahu is, giving this speech, and he's saying, "Oh, we're going to remain in our positions inside of Lebanon." And then he says, "We never said that our goal was to overthrow the Iranian government. It was to destabilize it and create the conditions so that the Iranian people could rise up, and we still maintain that track." But I bring this up because this is going to be an election issue, and Netanyahu said he is seeking the office again, that he is running again, and so. I think that the motivation and the desire for the Israelis to keep this war or even escalate it in Lebanon is very much on the table. And I think we're going to see in very real terms how far Trump actually would be willing to go. The Israelis are arguing that maybe a conflict with the United States on this level is necessary, that we need to assert our right to continue doing that. What the Axis of Resistance forces have said over and over is, let's see what Israel does when it's on its own, when it doesn't have the United States, constantly backing it up and trying to make excuses for it, not to mention arming it to the teeth. My suspicion is Trump's not going to do anything. That Trump's going to try to come up with some fake, justification for it, or call for calm, or go to Barack Ravid and say, "I said the F word 20 times to Netanyahu on a call." But it's going to come into conflict with Trump's deal. And unfortunately, you and I talked about this, I don't know, like a year and a half ago, about the Gaza situation. The only thing that potentially gets Trump to do anything toward Israel is when it starts to affect the, Trump family business or Trump's ego. And so I'm very pessimistic about the chances for Lebanon, the Lebanon part of this sticking with any realness. It's possible. It's possible that there would be some framework that appears to be a ceasefire, but getting the Israeli troops to do a humiliation march out of southern Lebanon, that would be extraordinary. It's not unprecedented. Nasrallah famously, stood in victory before the world after what many in the region view was a Hezbollah defeat of the Israelis,
Yeah.
20 years ago. So it's not without a historical precedent, but under this nutcase in the White House, by the way, I know you've seen this, but I'll just tell your listeners in case somebody didn't hear this. A few weeks ago, I was told by the Iranians that they had enlisted the services of senior psychologists to start assessing what exactly is going on with Trump's brain. And they talked about him being a psychotic individual, and so they started to work with mental health professionals to cater and edit and review the messages that they would send to the mediators to give to Trump. And they said that once they started working with these psychologists, they noticed that the responses started yielding results for the Iranian side,
Yeah.
and they attributed it in part to the way that the psychologists were helping them to craft their message so that Trump would respond to it. And so we're in a situation where we have Trump just had 22 medical professionals involved with his, assessment, more than any other president has had for any of their single medical reviews. the Iranians and the mediators both recognize they're dealing with an unstable, erratic character. And the Iranians took the step of actually having psychological professionals working the case because it was probably the most responsible thing to do.
Yeah. So I think you and I both agree here, but I want to hear your perspective further on it. That this was a major pressure valve release for Donald Trump, right? Like Iranians did actually offer a tremendous gift to Donald Trump on his birthday. It sounds really silly when we have this conversation on these, childish terms, but unfortunately, we do have a childish president, and I can't for the life of me figure out exactly what they saw from the Trump side that was different than a week ago or different than 2 weeks ago when this back and forth was taking place, or even different from the last time Israel felt like a deal was close and decided to hit Dahia, as they did earlier yesterday. That they saw something from the Trump side that was different this time around, that they were willing to offer him this massive W, this big moment of relief for the markets, which obviously is probably one of the only resilient pressure points for Donald Trump that he responds to.
Well, and also, the big boy was going to his fight match last night at the White House, and they had their carnival, and Don Jr. was up on the roof taking pictures. How awesome is this that we have this fight going on? And Trump got to go and have his happy birthday night watching the
G7 as well. Fight. He's going to go to the European leaders as he is right now to basically tell them that you guys suck.
He wants to cruise in. I'm the peace man. It was like the whole thing. It's the markets. It's the G7. It was his big night, at the White House with the UFC. But all I can share with you guys is just transparently the TikTok of how I started hearing about this stuff, because I actually think it's relevant. Last week, I was hearing a very pessimistic tone from Iranian negotiators. They were saying everything is basically done, and it's been done since late May. Like, we've had this thing locked, and Trump keeps changing the game, issuing sweeping new demands. The mediators will come and they'll say the Americans have agreed to this, and then like an hour later, Trump posts something on social media. So they were saying nothing is happening, and I'm telling you, even hours before Trump made that announcement, the Iranians were saying, I think it was the night before Trump's announcement, so this was 2 nights ago, I was told, look, there are 2 main issues. They wouldn't tell me what they were, but they said there are 2 main issues that we've told the Americans are sort of our drop dead red lines that they're not budging on right now. And if there can be a creative solution to those, then we're going to all be able to announce this, that this understanding has taken place. And then yesterday, as I told you, I was told we're an hour or so away from attacking Israel in response to the bombing of Lebanon. And then, literally, I was going to publish that because it was what the plan was. And in fact, Iranians were saying this publicly. And then these meetings happen and the Qataris are there. And so I do think it's plausible, Hasan, that part of what happened is what the Iranians are saying, that Trump recognized that this Israeli attack on Beirut was going to mess up his entire deal. He recognized that the Iranians had a legitimate right to strike, that they had told Trump that they would strike if Netanyahu did this again, and that they would hold him responsible for it. And I think it is plausible that those issues the Iranians had identified and were having trouble getting past with the Americans via the mediators came through at the 11th hour because Netanyahu did that. I think that's plausible.
Yeah. That's the main, that's what's being reported at this point. So one of the things that we obviously can now rely on or look forward to, I guess, is not just like the Israeli posturing and the saber rattling, which there's plenty of that and plenty of crying from people who obviously care more about Israel's interest than even America's interest. But the other thing that we can look at now to figure out whether or not this deal is resilient, this MOU is real, is what Israel will actually do. So one of the Iranian memorandum of understanding points that I've heard over and over again, but again, we don't know if it's real or not, is the idea that is the assurance that Trump gave Iran that Israel would not only stop bombing Beirut, but also pull its forces from Lebanon in its entirety. Now that seems far-fetched, and I don't even know if it's even possible at this point, given the domestic considerations from Benjamin Netanyahu and how much Israeli society is up in arms, saying that this has been a spectacular failure. But obviously, America does have this power if they chose to make sure Israel is restrained, considering that Israeli fighter jets are actually American fighter jets. The munitions that they're deploying are actually American munitions. The jet fuel that they're using are actually American jet fuel that they're taking advantage of. So without America's go-ahead, Israel can't behave in this belligerent manner.
Yeah,
what do you suspect Israel will do is what I'm asking, because I think they're going to try to spoil this by taking bolder and bolder steps, where Iran will probably recalculate their strategic military deterrence. Like, will they reestablish it? And Israel will see how far they can violate the red lines being drawn.
Yeah, I mean, this really, I think, is, if not the central question, it's one of the main ones that everyone should really keep their eyes on. I mean, weeks ago, when Netanyahu started moving further north, when the Israelis started moving their troops further north, I said on a few of our streams and elsewhere that I suspected that what was happening is that Netanyahu wanted to push as far into Lebanon as he could, so that when the music stops, meaning when Trump does actually announce some kind of a deal, that the Israelis are deep into Lebanon, so that it gives the appearance that by simply ceasing fire for a period, that a deal has been achieved or a victory has been kind of won, in the sense that, okay, we've gotten everybody to stop shooting. Hezbollah is not firing, the Israelis are not firing, but the Israelis are then entrenched there. And it's much more difficult to get troops to withdraw than it is to stop firing. And now there's so many troops so deep into Lebanon that it would give the public appearance of a kind of humiliation march that happened as a direct result of Iranian intervention. And it's interesting, Joseph Aoun, the president of Lebanon, had a call with Arachi today, and his tone shifted quite a bit, where he didn't specifically thank Iran for what it's done regarding Lebanon, but he acknowledged that the Iranians and he acknowledged that countries had included Lebanon in all of this, which is an interesting shift in his tone from some weeks ago, when he was basically telling Iran, we don't need your ceasefire, which was crazy. I mean, it's just pure lunacy. But so having said that, some Iranian sources and officials were saying and suggesting over the past 12, 15 hours that Trump had agreed that the Israelis were going to withdraw from Lebanon. When I first read that, I said, this would be an extraordinary term, because I had been read the exact text the night before. Now, it could have been changed. Maybe it is in there. But the text that I was read the night before, that the Iranians said was what had been mutually agreed to, mentioned nothing about the ground troops. It just stated a cessation of hostilities, a ceasefire. It didn't say anything about the withdrawal of troops. And the reason I remember it so vividly is because I've been asking about this repeatedly. Because ceasing fire is one thing, withdrawing the occupation forces is another thing entirely. We see the problem of that in Gaza. Well, the Israelis are both firing and moving deeper in with their occupation forces. So if it's in the deal, that's quite an achievement on the Iranians' part, because then the guarantor of that is Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And then the Iranians can rightly make the argument that this is an act of aggression against a party to the ceasefire, and the terms of it said they would withdraw, and they're not withdrawing. So Iran's position would be very strong to argue that. I'll be surprised, but I'll be impressed if that is a term in there. We'll have to wait and see. Somebody is claiming they're going to publish this thing. The real crazy thing that could happen is that competing versions could be published. Right now, we have J.D. Vance talking, we have Ghalibaf talking, we have Arachi talking, we have Trump talking. The rubber hits the road when we see what both sides have agreed to. And I suspect that, the longer this thing drags on, it's not to the benefit of this agreement. They need to publish this thing and show everyone what the actual agreement is. So I would say that the Israelis are unlikely to withdraw, short of what you're describing. If Donald Trump really wants to make this a priority, he can get the Israeli troops out of there. All the bluster from Netanyahu and other politicians will go, they can cry all they want to the moon. If Trump wants them withdrawn, they're going to withdraw. That's just the story. The other thing is the issue that I see a bunch of commenters here from your community mentioning the $300 billion reconstruction fund. That's an interesting question. Iran has said differing things over the past 48 hours about where this is going to fit into the agreement and who's going to be funding it. The Iranian position is they want $300 billion as a reconstruction fund, and the funds for that are going to be provided by countries that participated in the attack against Iran, and they would define as that being those Gulf countries.
Yeah.
Now, Trump and Vance may see some utility to that scenario that is better than other forms of giving Iran money, where they basically say, this is a humanitarian gesture. Trump says he'll go and maybe he's even going to go to the quote unquote signing ceremony, that it's going to be a new day. And, the Gulf countries have generously decided to help poor Iran recover after, we had to obliterate all of these things because they wouldn't say that they wouldn't have a nuclear weapon. They could say that this fund exists for those purposes. We're getting some hints from the U.S. that something like that is going to be on the works. I don't know if it's going to be $300 billion, but it does seem like something's going to be there. We really don't know who's telling the truth until we see the document. Yeah. And I suspect that what they claim to have digitally signed isn't even the final thing. Because I think there's still some very serious technical, at a minimum, technical issues being discussed ahead of this potential meeting on Friday.
Well, the other thing that we can also look at and interpret is troop positions, naval assets, whether they retreat in a meaningful capacity, and also oil tankers and other ships transiting through the Strait of Hormuz unimpeded. Because there's one element here where the Iranian side is saying that there are still going to be strict controls over who gets to transit through the Strait of Hormuz unimpeded, whereas the Trump side has very clearly stated that no, all ships can now transit through the Strait of Hormuz. And then last but not least, once again, what Israel will do. There's a Haaretz article that just came out saying Israeli withdrawal from Lebanon, not part of U.S. Iran deal, a White House official says. So Israelis are very stern on this position that like their sovereignty will not be violated by the American side. Now, of course, we know that there is no such thing as Israeli sovereignty without the American go-ahead. So any kind of initiative that Benjamin Netanyahu takes here, if it doesn't follow significant punishments from the Trump side, like significant restraints from the Trump side, would imply that America is probably on board with what Israel is doing, while simultaneously telling the Iranians something different.
But the Gaza analogy, I think, is relevant in a narrow set of ways. The deal that was signed between the Palestinian side and the Israelis in October of 2025 had maps for withdrawal of Israeli forces to the so-called Yellow Line, and then it was going to be a further withdrawal and pullback. The Israelis have violated every possible aspect of the ceasefire, and in fact, they've moved deeper into Gaza. And my colleague Sharif Abdel Quddus did a story recently based on satellite photos that were analyzed by forensic architecture, showing the construction of what appear to be kind of military infrastructure in the eastern part of Gaza, where the Israelis seem to want to build some kind of a Potemkin village. But the point I'm making is that as the Israelis have violated this and they've moved deeper rather than further out of Gaza's territory, of Palestinian territory in Gaza, there's been no one to respond to that on a military level, because if the Palestinians respond, they're going to say, oh, they violated the ceasefire, and then it's going to be, they're going to just go complete full-blown scorched earth on them again. And so the Palestinians have shown restraint. They've appealed to the international community. No Arab country is standing up for the Palestinians on a military level whatsoever. Iran did at times, during the Gaza genocide, but they don't have an Iran in their corner right now. Hezbollah is in a totally different position in that sense, because if the Israelis are violating a deal where Trump is the guarantor of it, and let's set aside the issue of the withdrawal of troops, because I tend to embrace your skepticism on this. As I told you last night, when I heard it, I was saying, okay, I'm skeptical of this. If they did it, I'll be very impressed. But I tend to doubt it. And the fact that American officials now are saying it's not part of the deal, we have to wait and see what's in there. But let's just say it's a ceasefire and the Israelis move deeper in, or there are reports they're going to send even more troops into Lebanon, or they're going to start hitting Beirut again. What lingers over the whole thing then, and Trump has to be aware of it, is that the Iranians could say, you're not going to stop them, we're going to stop them. And the Iranians start launching attacks. Then Trump's going to have to say, well, does the war resume again? Or do I say now that Israel gets to attack Iran again? Things could cascade into something really atrocious really fast as a result of this. So the Israelis are doing what they always do. And the question is going to be how Trump is going to handle it. But Hezbollah has a different guarantor than Hamas and the Palestinians have. And it's horrible for the Palestinians. It's absolute, just living atrocity that we watch every single day. I hope people understand this, that whole situation there, more Palestinians have been killed than Israeli civilians died on October 7th since that ceasefire was signed. They don't allow the agreed upon aid to enter. They don't allow heavy construction equipment to enter. They are assassinating the very officials that they signed a ceasefire deal with, in addition to murdering children, women, and others on a daily basis. It's an abomination. But Hezbollah would say, if we're party to this agreement, then that means Iran gets to address ceasefire violations.
Yeah. And Kojat actually restricted additional humanitarian aid, including food, from going into Gaza right after they struck Dahia, and then Iran retaliated militarily.
Those who punish the Palestinians.
Exactly.
That's another thing.
This is the one speed
he's
they
going to
have.
continue to punish them.
Yeah.
The Palestinians, as this election season goes on, this is something. No one should stop talking about Palestine. We should not stop talking about Gaza. This is exactly what the Israelis want, because the Palestinians are going to be like their punching bag. They're going to be whipping them, killing them, murdering them, punishing them, occupying more of their territory. They're going to take out so much of their anger about whatever defeats Trump is negotiating his way into. They'll take it out on the Palestinians.
Which goes back to the same exact point over and over again that Israel has shown the rest of the region. Israel only responds and only retreats when there's sufficient military deterrence. Something that we also saw with our own two eyes, the strategic patience or the strategic restraint deployed by the former supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei was something that Israel saw as perceived weakness. And perhaps they greatly underestimated the Iranian deterrence capabilities, and we saw that happen as well within the last 108 days now. Having said that, however, any kind of lack of response from the Iranian side, I believe, will be perceived as weakness, correctly or incorrectly. It doesn't matter. Will be perceived as weakness by the Israeli side and certainly by the Trump administration as well. I mean, judging by, I'm not a psychiatrist, right? But judging by the way that Trump has talked about like any kind of concession, any kind of interest from the Iranian side to come to the table and follow along in a ceasefire negotiation, Trump perceives as weakness by the Iranian side. The Iranians are scared that they're that they're worried that the American blockade is effective, that the American military response has been effective in deterring the Iranians from establishing sufficient military deterrence. So that's what we're going to see. I think Israel is going to actively prick and actively try to undermine the establishment of the MOU. And until Donald Trump turns around and punishes Israel for it, if Iran if Iran doesn't retaliate, then they're going to keep pouncing, I think.
Yeah, I think I've been debating this with some friends who are Iranian academics and analysts too about this issue of, if let's say we get this MOU and the Strait of Hormuz is open, and Trump finds a way to repatriate a substantial enough amount of Iranian frozen assets that the Iranians feel like they're keeping their deal, and there's something resembling a ceasefire in Lebanon. Maybe it's not that the Israelis fully withdraw, but there is some action that kind of bridges it from one week to the next, and we kind of move toward the nuclear negotiation issue. And then you're in a serious process. And instead of sending Trump's golf friends and Jared Kushner, they start to send technical experts, and the Iranians have their technical experts, and there starts to be incremental discussion about the lifting of sanctions. Let's say that starts to go on. The Iranian internal situation, we don't know entirely where it's going to fall. There certainly has been a rallying around the flag dynamic in Iran. There's no question about that. The huge displays in the street.
Yeah.
This is not just the party has told people to come into the streets. Iranians of a variety of political perspectives, including people who are opponents of the current Iranian government, have made very clear their opposition to the Israeli-U.S. war against their country and the threats of Trump to destroy their civilization. But when the kind of war footing starts to become different, and it becomes a negotiation footing, then the divisions within the political echelons of the society start to become more real, more textured. There's discussion about whether to ratify certain agreements. You also may have an appearance publicly, perhaps even at the funeral procession or the funeral services for laying to rest the late Supreme Leader. Maybe Mojtaba Khamenei is actually going to appear publicly and is going to give a speech, and we're going to get some sense of how he sees things. We do get information, but we haven't heard him give a speech. We haven't seen him give a speech. So all of that will play out. There will be political debate and discussion. Iran is not the monolithic one-party society that it's so reduced to in the American narrative. There is actual debate. There are differing points of view, and there's the broader context, which it's been strangled with economic sanctions for a long time. There's been financial mismanagement. There was the massive Bazari protest that took place. Before that, there were protests of oil sector workers. The anger at the government was real on financial matters. That doesn't mean that people were saying we want the state demolished or we want the government gone. Certainly some people want that. But Iran is a very diverse society on every possible level. And so when then that's your reality, Ghalibaf the other day said that this is the language we speak best. We can speak other languages, but this is the language we speak best. That was and referring to being on a war footing. When you're not on that war footing anymore and you don't have the constant specter of America and the Zionists attacking you, then you have to deal with what do the people actually believe now? And to me, that is going to be the next question. And when you have the U.S. and Israel trying to foment internal violent rebellion or insurrection or riots or attacking police stations or religious institutions, and you have an economic situation that isn't markedly improving, and you have people struggling, Iranians are like anyone else in the world. They don't want to have 100 times inflation. They don't want to have the price of carrots going up multiple factors from the time you get paid to the time you go to the market. No one wants to live like that in the world. It's perfectly normal to say, I don't like what my government is doing, or to recognize there's a foreign power involved with this, but also my government has its own responsibility. So when all those issues become the kind of dominant conversation on the street, then we'll see what kind of reality exists there. And I don't know the answer to that question. I don't think anyone does right now. And I think that we're going to hear a lot from Iranians in the weeks and months to come, and we're going to understand where they fall on who's to blame for this and what they think should happen next.
Yeah. Well, Jeremy Scahill, thank you so much for coming on. This was wonderful as always and very informative. I look forward to reading more about your reporting on the matter. Hopefully.
We can discuss it in London.
Yeah. Oh, well. Yeah,
terrible.
Well,
I was supposed to be with you
soon.
there, and then no, not too soon, man. This was outrageous. I went on Sky News then talking about your case, you and Cenk being banned, and now this Israeli group, this Israeli entity group, Camera, is going after Yalda Hakim and Sky News for having interviewed me.
Yeah.
And it was during that interview that I was denouncing the UK's targeting of two of you and setting it in the context of what they're doing to Palestine Action, which now they've just upheld their prescription as a terrorist organization. These heinous prison sentences that they just hit people with. Yeah. But I'm joking about you and I meeting in London, but I'm bringing it up because when they go after you, it then shed light on the fact that this is part of a sweeping attack on critics of Israel and an attempt to criminalize activism on behalf of a people who are being subjected to genocide with the support of the British government and the American government. And it reminds us that all the counterterrorism laws in the U.S., if you trace it back historically, they all go back to trying to criminalize support for Palestine.
Yeah, I mean, the first ever legal mention in the legislature of terrorism comes from an anti-PLO measure, if I'm not mistaken. So Yeah, this is baked into America's like anti-terrorism, counterterrorism laws, and it is always Israel has always been at the forefront of that initiative, and we're seeing it come to a, I guess, final conclusion because like they're exhausting all of the goodwill that remained in the Western world, where the overwhelming majorities are saying enough is enough, and they're demanding that their elected representatives recalculate their allegiance to Israel. And so I think Western countries now have a new calculation here. Do they abide by the democratic process? Do they allow there to be some kind of pressure valve to be released because the demands are getting overwhelming? Or do they just drop all pretense of democracy, the democratic process, and just show their voters, show their populations that they have no investment whatsoever in maintaining even a theoretical democratic process here, all at the behest of a foreign nation that is actively destabilizing global energy markets due to its own belligerent nature, due to its own belligerent ambitions of expanding with unlimited support from the West, of course, the Greater Israel Project.
Yeah. Hey, Hasan, before I say bye, I also want to just mention, I mean, I often express my gratitude to your community of viewers and the audience you've cultivated. But I was thinking, when I saw you get banned and then Dropsite took a position that we would no longer participate in the South by Southwest conference because of the way that it responded to your banning, and the statement that they issued, which made it sound like it was a basic immigration matter that had no political, component to it at all. But as we sort of discussed how we would respond to seeing this happen to you, we also, in part, it was political. It was clear, we should not be endorsing this, and we need to use our platform to make a statement about this. But also, it was when you knew that Dropsite was coming even before we launched it, and part of what we had no idea if anyone was going to read us or support us, and there were a handful of people, yourself and Amy Goodman, really prime among them, that we said, well, at least we know that those guys are going to try to tell people that this publication exists. And so I want to give big gratitude because your community of people were among the first people that signed up to become subscribers to Dropsite. So we'll forever be grateful to you for having our back right out of the gates.
Of course, and vice versa. I mean, I'm forever grateful that there are real investigative reporters out there who are not, stopping themselves from pursuing the truth and going out and talking to the supposed foreign adversaries that America actively tries to undermine the position of. There's no way to come to a reasonable conclusion without understanding the logical through line as to how these groups exist, why these groups exist, what their goals are, and what they're choosing to do. So yeah, it's we all try to play a role in this in small part. So thank you.
Stay strong, Hasan, man. Don't let them get to you ever.
No, of course not. Thank you. Jeremy Scahill, everybody from Dropsite News. Go to dropsitenews.com/Hasan for 20% off your subscription and support independent media. Bye, Jeremy.
Bye.